Hello and welcome to Justice. I'm Judge Jeanine Pirro. A double standard in Washington. Members of Congress engaged in conduct that would land the rest of us in jail. But for them, it's perfectly legal. Peter Schweitzer is a fellow at the Hoover Institution and author of Throw Them All Out. Now, Peter, welcome. Thanks for being with us this evening.
Thanks so much, Judge.
Your book is based on the premise that members of Congress are making a lot of money based upon their position and their power in Washington. How is that happening?
Well, they leverage their position and power, and they use it to get favors or to use their access to inside information. So, for example, if they're on a committee that deals with health care issues, they may be privy to knowing whether the Food and Drug Administration is going to approve a certain drug, whether the Medicare program is going to stop reimbursing for a drug, and that's going to have a huge effect on stock prices. They're free to trade on that information, and they do trade on that information. They also leverage their position in the stock market by getting access to IPOs, or initial public offerings of stock.
Right, that's not available to the rest of us.
That's right, and it's pretty remarkable. Think about it this way, Judge. If you were a United States Senator and I walked into your office with a shoebox and gave you $10,000 in cash, we're both going to go to jail. It's called bribery. If I walk into the same office and say, Senator, I'm going to give you access to IPO shares of stock and you're going to make $100,000 in a day, that's completely legal, and that goes on all the time.
Well, you know, in fact, in your book, and I read it, I thought it was excellent, you talk about Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
Tell us about what happened with her with these IPOs.
Well, she and her husband got access to 5,000 shares of Visa IPO shares in the so-called Friends and Family round. These are shares that are designated for very, very high net worth individuals that brokers want to maintain good relationships with. What's unusual about it, and Newsweek did follow-up reporting on this, is that this was really part of Newsweek's effort to target her, to influence her on credit card legislation. So they got 5,000 shares of stock. They were able to buy it for $44 a share. The next day when it went public, it went up to $66 a share. Literally, they made $100,000 in one day.
And Dennis Hastert as well. Now, he's a guy who starts as a wrestling coach. When he retires as Speaker of the House, he's worth $11 million.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. If you don't have a taste for the stock market, and Dennis Hastert didn't, Dennis Hastert liked buying land. So he literally bought 160 acres of farmland in rural Illinois, which is the state he was representing. A few months after he bought that land, he literally put a $220 million earmark into the federal highway bill to build a highway. And guess where that highway went? It went right by the land that he had just bought. Now, when it became public knowledge that this new parkway was going to be built with our money, he was able to turn around and sell that land. This total time here is a year, and he more than doubled his money. And that was courtesy of our taxpayer money. And that goes on all the time as well.
And you know, Peter, I don't remember there even being an issue about that at the time. All right, let's talk about, you know, on the other side of the aisle, we're talking about Democrats and Republicans.
Oh, yes, yes.
We've got Maurice Hinchey from New York. This guy comes into Congress 2004, net assets $74,000. 4 years later, he's worth $727,000 because why? Tell us.
Well, because of land deals. There was land that he owned in his district. He put in an earmark to upgrade, the sewer system and everything else. That spiked the value of the land, and he saw the benefits from it. And it's very common that this goes on. You have members of Congress who are in urban districts. They get earmarked funds to extend a light rail system. It just happens to go right by commercial real estate that they own. It's astonishing. And what's scary about this, Judge, is it's all legal. And the ethics committees say as long as you can demonstrate at least one other person benefits, it's okay to do this. It's okay to profit from it. It's an outrageous standard.
Well, if one other person benefits, if you have a big family, I mean, then everybody can benefit. But you know what makes me crazy about this? When Maurice Hinchey comes back to his district, he says, hey, I brought all this money to the district. He leaves out the fact that, by the way, and I'm improving the water and the infrastructure on my property.
That's exactly right. It's very convenient, isn't it? And you kind of wonder whether he would fight for it if that was somewhere else in the district rather than underneath the property that he owned.
Crazy stuff. In terms of your investigation, who was the absolute worst?
It's really hard to determine that because there's so many cases. I think Spencer Baucus, who was the ranking Republican on the House Financial Services Committee during the 2008 crisis, it's really stunning. This is a guy who took the time during this maelstrom storm that was going around to do 40 options trades. And he would short the market. He would literally have a briefing with the Fed chairman and the Treasury secretary who would tell him, here's how bad the situation is. He would go the next day from that private meeting and he would buy options to short the market. That is, bet that it was going to drop dramatically. And he made tens of thousands of dollars doing this. He was involved in writing the TARP legislation. He bought options during that period. It's remarkable. I'm amazed that, because he makes his own trades, I'm amazed that he found time to do anything else.
Well, and you know, the whole idea is his value goes up when the market goes down.
You're betting against America and you're winning big.
And he was winning big. Well, the scary part is that, that nobody's making a big issue of this. I mean, your book is really unearthing a lot of this stuff that people just take for granted. But tell us about Kerry and Boehner. What did those guys do?
Well, here you have a situation where I tried to take the approach that the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, would do if they were investigating our stock trades or somebody else's. You look at access to information. Clearly, they were both very much involved in the healthcare debate and determining the fate of that legislation. And you look at the patterns of their stock trades. And what you see is, in the case of John Kerry, he was on a critical committee that helped write that legislation. He was pushing for Obamacare. At the same time, the investment funds that he and his wife own were massively and aggressively buying pharmaceutical stock. And they were buying manufacturers of medical equipment, and they were selling health insurance company stocks. And the timing is amazing when you look at the pattern of the two. John Boehner, there's not quite the same long pattern, but it's curious that in December of 2009, just a few days before the public option was killed, the public option was where the government was going to offer health insurance. A few days before that, John Boehner's investment portfolio added 5 health insurance company stocks.
Okay, and what's interesting is that if both sides of the aisle are doing it, and you talk about Boehner and you talk about Kerry, I mean, it's in their interest to keep it quiet.
It is. It is. It's legal graft.
All right, Peter, stand by. How is this legal? Find out what happened when one congressman tried to change the status quo in Washington. Peter Schweitzer and I are joined by Brian Baird, former congressman from Washington, and Lise Wheel, former federal prosecutor and Fox News analyst. Lise, I'm going to start with you. Congresspeople trading on insider information. Is that legal?
Yes, Judge, it's legal. As long as they trade on information that they get during their job, which in the cloakroom, as you were talking about, or somewhere else, something that they learn, but not from the corporation directly. It's legal. It's unethical, but it's legal and should be changed.
Okay.
Very unethical.
And you know what's amazing is these guys are always pontificating about how ethical they are, yet nobody's talking about changing the law to cover them. So that if they do...
Well, and the times that it has been brought, it just absolutely went nowhere, which I know you're going to get to, but I'm just saying one thing what's crazy to me about that is what politician can vote and go back to his constituents and say, yeah, I voted against the bill that won't let me inside trade, and you can't do it yourself.
Well, and the reason that happens is because, and we have a person who knows, Representative Baird. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. Now,
my pleasure.
Talk to us.
Thank you.
For years, you tried to get a law passed. I believe it's a Stock Act that would remedy this. Tell me about it.
Well, indeed, just as Peter said, this should be illegal, and I was shocked when I discovered it wasn't. There are actually firms in Washington, D.C. called political intelligence firms. Now, I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but their job is to go out and gather information to make investment decisions and advice on. As long as it's public information, I have no real problem with that. But the real value would come from non-public information. So I began to explore, is this legal? And sure enough, as your other guests have said, it is not illegal. If we don't get the information from a company, if we just get it from inside our work in Congress, we can trade on it. We don't have to report our trades for more than a year. It's almost impossible to trace. And even if you catch us, it's not illegal. All
right, so you're a congressperson. You make a decision that you want to do something about this. You draft legislation. Tell us what happened with this proposal.
Well, we did everything right. We sent letters to our colleagues. I met with leadership. I talked with committee chair Louise Slaughter, that I co-sponsor, and now Tim Waltz and I worked very hard on this. And colleagues either said, well, not interested, or it must already be illegal. I'm sure it is, so we don't have to do anything about it. And more troubling still, some people, in fact, a number of people said, doing what you're asking us to do would be very inconvenient, and I don't want to go there.
And that's when they actually told that to you?
Indeed. You know, most members of Congress are responsible, ethical people, but they didn't take the next step to say, we need to make sure as an institution we all hold one another accountable. And that was really a sin of omission. And I think we're finally, at long last, going to correct that, I hope.
Well, and you know what, Congressman, one of the problems is that, you know, I was a sitting DA. I mean, there's freedom of information laws that apply to me. There's disclosures that apply to me. We've got these very generic disclosures, Peter, that really tell nothing. They're so broad. I mean, how do we change that? If you've got the congressman who couldn't even get people to sponsor it, where are we going? Is there hope for us?
Well, I think there is hope. I mean, Congressman Baird was for this change before this change was cool. They had 6 co-sponsors to the Stock Act when he first introduced it. There are now, I think, close to 40 since the 60 Minutes episode and my book came out. Yes.
And the more that you write about it, the more that we talk about it, the more 60 Minutes covers it, then it's coming to the point where how is a politician going to go home and say, no, I didn't vote for that?
Well, you know what they say? They say blind trust. I really didn't know about it. But here's the problem with a blind trust, Lise. What they can do is they can discuss things with the trustee, but as long as you don't say buy it, the information you learn in a closed-door meeting.
But if they pass along the information, that's fine. So the law does need to be changed to heighten that duty of confidentiality that they don't have now. That would go a long way to protecting us, I think.
All right, guys, I'm going to ask all of you this. Do you fear that the cronyism has gone so far, it's so embedded, it's so entrenched, that there's no way for us to get out of this? I mean, do you have hope, Peter?
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, so I have to have hope. And I have hope in the American people. I have hope that we have some good people in Washington.
Yeah, but so we have hope in ourselves. But what about them in Congress?
Well, I think we've got to make it clear that if you're going to go into public service, you're not going to cash in. If you're interested in cashing in, find something else to do. The example I use in the book is, you know, military generals, a 3-star general in the Army makes less than a freshman congressman. You don't see generals running around saying, oh, I'm kind of entitled.
Or, you know what, buying a munitions company. You know what, Mr. President, we need to go bomb this place. I'm investing in munitions. Representative Baird, first of all, thank you for what you've done. But do you have any hope at all that we're going to get, you know, be a little more ethical?
I think it is. I think people realize now that it's a problem. It's been called to their attention. They've seen examples of abuse. Before, people would say, this isn't even a problem. Why do we need to fix it? Well, it's a huge problem, as Peter and others have talked about. And now I think people realize on a policy basis it needs to be fixed. But at long last, I think they finally get politically, you don't really want to go back to your constituents and say, look, Congress passed laws to require people to report their financial trades within 48 hours. We don't have to for a year. Congress has passed laws to make insider trading illegal. Those don't apply to us. Who wants to run on that platform? I invite them to do so and see how it goes.
Well, and you know, Lise, you can show as a federal prosecutor with the SEC if there's a pattern of trade.
Absolutely.
And yet that still doesn't apply to them either.
Not yet, but if the laws change, and I think that, you know, you were asking, do we have hope? I have hope because I think politicians want to keep their jobs. And as much as we're talking about this and making this an issue, then they're going to have to change the law.
Well, all right. And the shame of all of this is the sense of entitlement, the arrogance, that they're not at all embarrassed to say, I want an earmark, I want money near my property to improve the infrastructure or whatever. Anyway, Peter, I got to tell you, great book. Lise Wheel, thanks for being with us. And Brian, thank you so much for what you've done. I think you have started something that may end up in a very positive way. Thank you for your service.
I think so.
All right.
Thank you.